Everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of Seduction of the Innocent. As always, I am Mary, senior editor for oncomicsground.com. I am also the co-host of Panel to Panel and an uppity amateur comic historian. And with me, as always, is Kai.
Hi, I'm Kai. I'm the marketing director at oncomicsground.com. I'm the co-host of Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast here on the
Do you want
channel.
to give yourself a shout out at all, or?
To what? Hello? Am I not coming through?
Not on my end, but you're probably coming through on the stream, okay?
I mean, I hope so. Do you want to just... Do you want to talk for a second and I will test my
Yeah,
mic
why don't we
again?
just go ahead and
You
jump
just
right
jump
in with
into
this
it, yeah.
topic? Yeah,
I
let's
will.
let's just jump into it. Oh God, I'm Philip DeFranco. Um, okay, so today's topic is going to, ironically, and I didn't do this on purpose, but it's going to tie back into our previous two topics. You'll see those come into play a little later. Today we are talking about the lawsuit that kind of changed the copyright issues around comic books entirely. We're talking about National Comics Publications Incorporated versus Fawcett Comic Publications Incorporated. In layman's terms, DC versus Shazam. So this is the lawsuit that they brought against Shazam's original publishers and led to how they ended up acquiring the character. Excuse me. And if you didn't know that, buckle up because this is one ridiculous ride, and DC was kind of being petty. So
I
let's
would.
just buckle up and jump right into this.
I am super excited to talk about this
National
one.
Comics Publication Incorporated versus Fawcett Comics Publication Incorporated was a decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. It was a 12-year legal battle between National and Fawcett, and from here on out, I'll be referring to National as just DC, and the case itself as DC versus Fawcett for general ease. DC as a company has had many different names. It has been more than one company: Detective Comics, Superman Incorporated, National Comics, etc. So, for the sake of ease, I'm just going to lump it all together. And so from here on out, it's just going to be DC. The
That
lawsuit concerned Fawcett's Captain Marvel character, now referred to as Shazam, for being a copyright infringement of Superman. Fun fact, this case is notable because it is also one of the longest running legal battles in comic book history, topping out at about 12 years. So this legal battle ended up going on for 12 years. The suit resulted in the dissolution of Fawcett Comics and the cancellation of all of its superhero related publications, including Captain Marvel, aka Shazam. In the 1970s, DC licensed the rights to Captain Marvel and revived the character. DC then purchased the rights fully in 1991. We're going to break all of these down and talk about the details and the case one at a time.
there's a
So,
lot. Can you hear me
for
now?
reference, Captain Marvel was not the
Nope.
first superhero or even the first Fawcett superhero to be subject of a copyright infringement suit. In 1939, DC filed a suit against Fox Feature Syndicate, say that 3 times fast, for their Superman like Wonder Man, same name, no relation. The case was brought to court in Detective Comics Incorporated versus Bruns Publication Incorporated. I see, I told you, multiple different companies. After losing the case to DC, Fox Feature Syndicate ceased all publication of Wonder Man after just one issue. This ruling actually becomes important later on because it established a legal precedent and influenced the outcome of subsequent Superman infringement cases, including the focus of this episode. And once legal, at least in the United States, once legal precedent has been established, rulings tend to tip in that favor. The first suit against Fawcett actually came the following year, after the Wonder Man suit. Here, DC sued Fawcett's Masterman character. In the case of Masterman, Fawcett did the same thing as Fox Features had done, and they canceled publication of the character entirely.
So I got a question here. Can you hear me?
However,
Nope.
after DC brought a suit against Captain Marvel and company, Fawcett decided to fight the allegations that Captain Marvel, the star of their Whiz Comics periodical, was an illegal copy of Superman. And here's where it gets kind of interesting, and we kind of see that maybe DC was being a little petty. Captain Marvel had proven to be very successful for the company and had, within 2 years of his existence, become the flagship comic book character. The company's flagship comic character. As a matter of fact, Captain Marvel had become the most popular superhero in the country. He was rapidly outselling Superman, and the comic Captain Marvel Adventures was the country's highest circulated comic, selling about 1.4 million copies an issue. I mean, that sale marker in and amongst itself is just ridiculous.
I was gonna say, is that
As a result of this massive success, Fawcett created an entire family of spin-off characters, including Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, Uncle Marvel, and Hoppy the Marvel Bunny. And I do want to take a brief aside to say that Hoppy the Marvel Bunny is the best super pet ever. I mean, I actually have one of those little stuffed animal versions of him, so... While DC's suit against Fawcett was pending, some specific elements unique to the Captain Marvel mythos began to find their way into Superman comics, including, but not necessarily limited to, Superman's ability to fly, Superman's archvillain Lex Luthor being a bald, quote, mad scientist like Captain Marvel's Dr. Sivana. And introducing the adventures of Superman as a teenager under the title of Superboy, after Captain Marvel's teenage sidekick Captain Marvel Jr. proved to be very popular. This would actually become crucial later on, as both characters had blue suits and red capes. Superboy wore a costume pretty much exactly the same to Superman, but it's those distinctions that will become important later on. So, Kai, what do we already think about this one?
I don't know if you can hear me yet. Can you hear me yet? Probably not. Oh my god.
Or perhaps not.
Oh my god. Okay,
we have the why. Let's address the how.
Can you hear me?
DC was unable to coerce Fawcett into ceasing publication of the Captain Marvel comics via a cease and desist in June of 1941. When the cease and desist went ignored, DC filed a lawsuit in September of 1941. This lawsuit would drag on for 7 years before finally being brought to trial in March of 1948. So, I mean, we're already seeing that this has taken a significant amount of time. And let's break down the arguments that DC brought to court. DC's central argument was that Captain Marvel's main powers, like super strength, super speed, invulnerability, even the skin-tight costume with a cape, and a news reporter alter ego, and the general characteristics were derived directly from Superman. Fawcett's counter-argument was that while yes, the characters were similar, the presented similarities were not legally infringing. For evidence, DC presented a massive 150-page binder featuring comic panels of Superman doing superhero stuff, juxtaposed with panels of Captain Marvel doing the exact same stuff in comics published at a later date than the aforementioned Superman comic. Fawcett tried to counter this by providing examples of Captain Marvel performing those same feats in comics at even earlier points in publication, or providing examples of other comic book heroes like Tarzan doing the same stunts in comics published before the Superman comics. So it was literally basically them just shoving each other forth over this. The courts did ultimately rule in Fawcett's favor because of information Fawcett's lawyers had uncovered about Superman's copyright status. The defense lawyers provided evidence that National Comics and the McClure Syndicate failed to copyright several of their Superman newspaper comic strips. And the trial judge decided that DC had abandoned its Superman copyright such that it was no longer valid. The trial judge did find, however, that Captain Marvel was not an illegal copy of Superman. So this ruling was absolutely devastating because the trial judge ruled that Superman did not have a copyright, that DC had no copyright for this character, therefore no claim and no legal protections for this character. So, as we can all understand, DC was not going to let this one go. And before we jump into the aftermath of everything that happens, why don't we go ahead and pause for an ad break? And Kai, do you want to jump in and do that one for us?
I would absolutely love to. Can you hear me this time? Like, I don't know if anybody can hear me. I don't know if you can hear me. Can we just pause? Like, can you hear me?
Um, Actually, folks, due to some quick technical difficulties, we might need to step away for 2 minutes. So we will be right back momentarily. Please hold on.
Oh, brother. I'm so sorry about that,
Well,
guys. I don't know if I was coming through for you guys or if it was just Mary who couldn't hear me, but I'm having technical difficulties over here. I blame the heat.
yeah. Honestly, that could be because there's a wildfire in your area.
Yes, well, it's outside of my area and everything is full of smoke right now. So,
I don't know, but
it's obnoxiously loud in here.
Oh yeah, but I mean, that happens with live streams sometimes. So I think folks can be forgiving.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't mind.
But
It's whatever. We're here now. Sorry about the wait, you guys. I super apologize. I don't know what the heck is going on with my computer. It's been a couple of days of my computer being ridiculous and not running anything. And, yeah. I don't know. It's just decided to stop working. So...
So do you have any commentary for the first part?
I did, and I was swearing a lot. I really hope that nobody heard me going, like, dropping F-bombs under my breath for, like, 10 minutes.
But
I've completely forgotten what I was going to say.
But no, it is absolutely wild that, and I understand that, Superman was their big character. And historically speaking, when we look at the golden age, Batman was not nearly as important of a character as Superman was. I mean, especially in the late 40s and early 50s, we start getting into the Superman radio show. And then there were and even before then, in like 41, 42, even 43, I think, there were the animated Superman shorts. So, I mean, Superman was big business. Even during the radio show, they teamed up with Kellogg to put little Superman buttons in boxes of Kellogg Pep cereal in the late 40s and early 50s. And that I actually found one on eBay, and I own one.
Oh, that's so cool.
Like, that should surprise no one. Yeah. I even have an autographed picture of the voice actors who played Lois Lane on the radio show.
Wow.
So Superman was big business, and it's still a big collector's item. And the rest of this case, I mean, especially here at the tail end, where the judge ruled that DC had abandoned its copyright entirely because of what essentially accounts for clerical error with newspaper comic strips.
That's...
So...
that just in and of itself is ridiculous. Just the... claiming the abandonment of an entire thing of the copyright.
Mm-hmm. I mean, go ahead.
I was gonna say, this whole thing smacks of just petty. It's just petty. Like, DC just comes off as so petty in this whole situation. It's like, well, you can't have a superhero comic because we have a superhero comic, and you can't have this and that because this and that. And it's petty. It's petty. That's all.
And oh yeah, no, it is absolutely petty. I told Kai before the show, it's kind of that one girl in middle school that we all knew who had some kind of like new sparkle jelly bracelet, and anybody who had one after her was copying and they couldn't ever wear it. Like, that's essentially DC in this scenario. And, I am a DC fan, but this is pretty damn petty. Like, my goodness. And it just gets worse. It just gets worse. So before we jump into the downward slide of Fawcett Comics, do you want to jump in and do a quick ad break?
Maybe if I can open the thing again. I'm not kidding. I'm having the worst technical difficulties over here. It's ridiculous.
I mean, folks, it's a Friday for us. We all have Friday brain right now.
It was my birthday yesterday. I have birthday, like,
yep.
I didn't sleep brain because it was too hot and I'm in a sugar coma from that cake.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you so much. It would also really help if I had the ads open.
of days like
my
today.
god. Oh my god.
Honestly, I think it adds kind of a personability vibe to it, because, if podcasts can't be personal, this isn't stuff you missed in history class.
Ooh, boy. Anyway, did you guys know that you could support your favorite writers and shows directly? You can by pledging to the On Comics Ground Patreon. Your dollars go directly to running the website and paying contributors. In return, you'll get early access to op-eds and featured content before the website, ad-free podcasts, access to a fan Discord, and you can help us unlock merchandise for your favorite podcasts and series. Head over to patreon.com/oncomicsground and donate today. Also, Monday Nights just got a whole lot more galactic. Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast, brings you a weekly roundup of news, reviews, and general discussion of everything to do with that galaxy far, far away. You don't need to be Force sensitive to enjoy this podcast. It's brought to you by On Comics Ground. I'm the co-host on that one. Be sure to tune in on Twitch every Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. We good?
We good.
We good. I get it out real fast because we have to do the ads. Get it out real fast so that when the technical difficulties happen again, at least I've got the ads done. Oh my god. Hello? Mary? Mary? Mary, I can't hear you all of a sudden. Oh my god. Oh my god, no, you can't. I literally can't hear you. You have stopped. And now Mary's having technical difficulties, apparently.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Apparently, they're contagious today.
Apparently.
I am
Oh, Lord have mercy. I'm wondering if it's a damn Wi-Fi issue.
I'm starting to think that our program for chatting like this it's that. I really think it's...
So we may have to resort to an alternative hosting, as it were.
Possibly. We may have to we'll look into that for next week. I hope everybody can hear us now.
For next week.
Week, yeah.
Okay. So, still reeling from their defeat, DC appealed this decision in 1951. They ended up in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit again, with the judge Learned Hand presiding. Yes, the judge's name was Learned Hand. Billings Learned Hand was this guy's name.
Was he? That sounds like a Native American.
I just want to take... No, just a guy. His father's name was Samuel Hand.
That's a beautiful, terrible...
Mm-hmm.
That just sounds like a 1950s Native American character. Like, it sounds like a caricature.
I did some side research into the judge, and Samuel, his father, I guess his father's name was Learned. So he named his son Billings Learned Hand.
Strange.
So, I mean, that is just such a wonderful name, isn't it?
I love it. It does sound like a caricature a little bit.
Right.
I kind of love it.
But when reviewing the previous ruling and the case and everything to go along with that, and, this is jumping back to DC's big 150-page binder, Judge Hand ruled in favor of DC. And so this partly reversed the trial court's decision. Hand ruled that the Superman copyright was valid, but the newspaper strip was not under copyright. So because they didn't copyright the newspaper, it was not under copyright, but Superman himself was, thereby reversing the previous decision of, since they didn't copyright the newspaper, Superman had no copyright. Don't you just love legalese?
It's tonal whiplash right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
But, I mean, and admittedly, I have to agree with this decision, that just because they didn't copyright the newspaper strip doesn't mean that the character did not have a copyright.
Well, no, I'm not arguing that. I feel like that's correct.
No.
It's just whiplash.
It's just like, kind of a, what is it? What's the expression, cold trout to the face?
Yes.
I'm from the Midwest. We say weird things.
I'll tell you about kissing the trout later.
Judge Hand also ruled that Captain Marvel was indeed an infringement of the copyright for Superman. So this is where things get kind of murky, because not only did he uphold DC's copyright, he ruled that Captain Marvel was indeed an infringement. Well, let me clarify. Hand did not rule that Captain Marvel, the character itself, was an infringement, but rather the specific stories and super feats could be infringement, and that it would have to be determined via a retrial. So, DC's big binder of, Superman punching somebody and then Captain Marvel punching somebody in the same way was infringement, which kind of creates an even more confusing legal precedent, especially since while, during that 7-year gap, we started to see Superman incorporating popular elements of Captain Marvel into its own line. So, even right now, this is literally a mess is the only word you can really use to describe it. That, Captain Marvel itself wasn't the infringement, but everything around the character essentially was. And he knocked it down to a lower court. And the U.S. Court of Appeals is it's tiered, and you start at a lower court and you go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But he knocked the decision down to a lower court. He pretty much said, "Look, I'm not dealing with this. Go somewhere else." And instead of appealing this decision to the Supreme Court, which Fawcett could have done, I mean, we're talking, the 9-justice Supreme Court of the United States. Fawcett just said, no, look, we're not going to do this. And they offered to settle with DC out of court. Now, this was for many different reasons. Superhero comic sales had been decreasing dramatically during the 1950s. So I want everybody to stop and say hi to Frederick Wertham and the Comics Code Authority.
Hi!
Yeah. That it all ties back into that, because Wertham's book and the subsequent formation of the CCA kicked the comics industry in the dick, basically. It kneecapped them. And sales were plummeting. So Fawcett basically said, we can't afford to do this. So ironically, Wertham's book ended up, propping up a character that he trashed in the book. Because in the book, Wertham refers to Superman as promoting fascist ideology. And this is an unlikely outcome of that. So I told you in the very first episode that this book reverberated across comic history, and here is yet another piece of proof. DC agreed to settle with Fawcett out of court. Fawcett forked over about $400,000. And I did some poking around, and I was a political science major in college. Math is not my strong suit. But if I calculated it out correctly, that $400,000 should translate to about $4.2 million in today money. So they had to pay that much in damage. What'd you say?
Yikes. Uh-oh. Mary, I can't hear you.
Yeah. Cut out. Oh no. Are you just laughing at the absurdity of it? That they had to pay,
Yeah, I said yikes and then started laughing like that's a lot of money.
Uh-huh. So not only did they have to pay that money, they agreed to cease publication of all of Captain Marvel's related comics. And this includes characters like Mary Marvel, Captain Marvel Jr. They actually sold the copyright to Hoppy the Marvel Bunny to a company whose name I did not write down. And instead of being Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, he was rebranded Hoppy the Magic Bunny. but that endeavor would be relatively short-lived. And unfortunately for Fawcett, things aren't over for them yet. Fawcett ended up canceling its entire superhero comic line. The entire creative staff for the comic book division, including C.C. Beck and Otto Binder, who were Captain Marvel's creators, were also laid off. The entire creative division was laid off, and the comic division was shut down entirely. Captain Marvel would remain out of print for the rest of the 1950s and the entirety of the 1960s. So, I mean, the decision was brought down in 51, so I mean, that's about 18, 19 years that Captain Marvel was out of publication. And I mean, that it would have been enough time for the character just to kind of disappear into history a little bit. Because when you look at comic books, that doesn't take very long. I mean, even by today's standards, with our massive rate of collection for these books, it doesn't take long. And in the Golden Age, trade papers and graphic novels and whatnot, those were not a thing. Comic books were these really thick magazines where you had, anywhere from 6 to 12 different stories depending upon the publisher. And it was just this big anthology book every month. And once those were published, they were published. They'd never be collected. I mean, publishers are just now, within the last, 15, 20 years, gathering up their Golden Age collections. But that's, also partially why Golden Age comics are so expensive and so valuable, that they're just gone. So that was enough time for Captain Marvel just to kind of, step out of the limelight a little bit. And trouble abounds for the character, because in 1967, Marvel Comics trademarked a character with the same name. And this created difficulties when DC licensed the rights to Fawcett's superhero characters in 1972. And they revived Captain Marvel in a comic periodical titled Shazam. And this is where, for people who are not, well-versed in comics, this is where it tends to get a little more recognizable under the name Shazam. And I also want everybody to stop and wave hello to Marvel, Carol Danvers, and Monica Rambeau, because that's where Marvel got the copyright from.
So wait.
Well, I mean, they didn't take the name. It was the copyright for the name Captain Marvel was available. And Marvel saw that, and, a little light bulb went off over their brains, and they're like, okay, we're Marvel Comics, let's have Captain Marvel.
That's exactly what I was about to ask.
They scooped up the copyright for the name. So even though the character we now know as Shazam was originally published under Captain Marvel, Fawcett and afterwards DC has lost the copyright just because DC didn't do anything with it initially. I mean, the license for the character was there during the 60s, but, comic books started to pick back up in the 60s. And why would you want to reestablish what was arguably Superman's biggest threat? So
it's exhausting. I can't even imagine,
it is.
It's exhausting just combing through this. Could you imagine being actually involved in this whole process where you're just suing people for character infringement that doesn't really exist, and then just the whole mess, and then being on the team that discovered, oh hey, there's a Captain Marvel, that's a copyright we could do, and then going for it. It's obnoxious. It's obnoxious. And the fact that DC is petty about it, because they didn't keep
But
their
I mean,
copyright.
slogging through the research for all of this, it was mind-boggling because, here's, 1 point, and then here's another point, and then these 2 points have to have a fist fight with each other to make this third point. And I've actually stripped the argument down for the sake of the show. And even then, I feel like I'm blasting through this so quickly, and I don't mean to. But also, Captain Marvel was the first superhero to end up on the silver screen, as it were, because there were Captain Marvel serials in the 40s. And there's actually a whole lawsuit attached to this for the copyright of the serials. So, I mean, when DC came, they brought a baseball bat in one hand and like a machine gun in the other. And they hounded them with a 12-year legal battle. And when in 1972 they revived the character, they also obtained the reprint rights for the original Fawcett comics and began running older stories as reprints in the back of the Shazam comics in the 70s. It's what's called a backstory. However, the license agreement required a per-use fee for every appearance by a Fawcett character, which limited DC's willingness to use the character. And as a result, most of them appeared very rarely once the Shazam series ended in 1978. So they didn't have the full rights, the full copyrights for these characters, so they had to pay a fee every time, Mary Marvel or somebody popped up in a comic book. That's another fee. So why are you going to publish characters that were a massive threat to Superman and you have to pay to put them on the page? But by the 70s, that was enough time to let, the people who were kids in the golden age who were buying Shazam, it was enough time for them to hit the nostalgia market. And, the 70 Shazam series, it sold like hotcakes. Because not only did people get new stories, they also got reprints of the stories from the 40s and somewhat into the 50s. So, I mean, it was a win-win for them, but DC, just kind of crossed their arms and went, nope, nope, nope. And then in 1987, DC relaunched Captain Marvel in a mini-series entitled Shazam, with an exclamation point. Shazam, the New Beginning. And they had fully purchased the rights to all of Fawcett's superhero characters by 1991. So I want you to think about that the lawsuit that they first lobbed at Fawcett was in the early 40s. Late 30s, early 40s. And the saga wasn't concluded until 1991 when they purchased full rights for all of them. And it's just mind-boggling when you look at it in that kind of a fashion, that this was literally a decades-long battle. And this is how aggressive DC was in the Golden Age, because Fawcett isn't the only publisher that they crushed or bought up. I mean, they went hard. They didn't just want to outsell the competition. They wanted to be the only one. They didn't want competition. And, if you lay out all of DC's characters on a tabletop, you can sit there and point out which ones come from different publishers, which, would become an issue for DC later on that they remedied with Crisis on Infinite Earth, which is a lovely series and you should go read it. But Captain Marvel has not proven to be a modern day success for DC to the degree that it was for Fawcett. And, this is due in large part to DC not being able to promote the character or promote the character properly under the Captain Marvel name, which is now, like I said, a Marvel trademark. Again, everybody say hi to Marvel, Monica Rambeau, and Carol Danvers. And especially after Captain Marvel brought in over $1 billion at the box office, DC ain't never gonna see that copyright again.
No, never.
Yeah.
I mean, okay,
never.
But wait, hold on. Shazam didn't do too badly.
Well, yeah,
but
I'm
nowhere
getting
near
to that.
the billion. Oh, are we there? Okay.
Yeah, we're almost there.
Okay, I don't read ahead in your notes or anything.
It also doesn't help that this is what, a 6-7 page outline, and even then I still feel like I've blasted through it, but we can discuss at the end.
Hey, we're not doing too bad. We're at 42 minutes, even though we had the technical difficulties, so we're not bad.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
I had a
but
comment
as a
and
result,
now I forgot what it was. Shit. Oh. It's gone. It's fine.
Is it about Monica Rambeau? Because we stand a queen in this house.
It was sorry. No, it was a marketing. It was a marketing thing, and now I've just completely forgot. It's fine. Yeah. It's not important.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, if this character was known as Captain Marvel for a good chunk of his history, and then all of a sudden you can't call him Captain Marvel, you gotta reach into the mythos and pull something else out, because Shazam is the name of the wizard that gives Billy Batson his powers. And as a result of all of this, when DC rebooted its entire line in the ill-fated New 52, yes, that is my spite coming through, in 2011, Captain Marvel was officially renamed Shazam. He was no longer Captain Marvel with any connection to that, and was reintroduced into comics in the following year under that name.
I remember and what I believe. Say.
Go for it.
I was gonna say, that just triggered my memory of what I was planning to say, was not being able to call him Captain Marvel because they lost that. Like, that just killed the whole nostalgia factor. And comics, to me, as an industry, just seems to absolutely run on nostalgia. Like, it is absolutely, I grew up with this, so I'm going to hand it down to my kids, and it is absolutely like, my favorite character is this character, and I read him during, the 90s, so clearly my kids now are going to love the same character for the same reasons, and then nostalgia fuels all the purchases, and nostalgia fuels why we still have certain characters that should maybe be retired, but they keep bringing money, and it's ridiculous, and that's a whole other... I'm not naming names. You can decide who I'm talking about in that bitter tone of voice.
But and like you said, it's essentially become the backbone of the entire industry, because comics had to change with time, and so they started being less of a simplistic, moral lesson for kids that they were in the 60s. And, through to part of the 70s, we talked about this a bit in the episode for the Comics Code Authority, that really kind of, if you want to put it bluntly, neutered comics a bit. And comics started progressing, and they had to, as the readership was getting older. And then, we saw a massive boom in indie creators in the late 80s and early 90s. And so that's when comics kind of fully transitioned to, that parental advisory label on your CD, like, hey, these aren't for kids anymore, kind of a thing. And I think that nostalgia factor has kind of played into that battle, where, you may have read this character as a kid, but you don't want to read the same stories you read as a kid,
Yes.
And I think all of that kind of ties into the fact that they just couldn't market Captain Marvel. In a roundabout point, if you can make sense of my rambling. I know few people who can.
Well, because he was too wholesome. He was this wholesome golden age 1940s character. And how do you market that when the marketing, or how do you do marketing for that and sort of uphold him when heroes are becoming darker? Like in 1987, in the early 90s, things were much darker. The stories, look at what Marvel was putting out there, the X-Men and the Punisher and all that sort of stuff, that and Deadpool in the early 90s was, bloody and dark. And so how do you keep up with that while you're trying to promote this character who is wholesome and delightful.
Oh yeah, I
So
mean to the point that in the Golden Age, Captain Marvel was referred to as the Big Red Cheese, and I mean, yeah, he was the Big Red Cheese.
that's beautiful.
But and I mean, especially if you look at the character himself, who he's a boy trying to be a good man, like it kind of, how do you translate that into the gritty adult storylines that were popular at the time? I mean, especially if you want to talk about after DC fully acquired the rights in 91, comics were extreme and gritty, and how the hell do you translate the Big Red Cheese into that?
No, you straight up can't.
Yeah.
There's no way.
But
Without raising some serious like moral questions, like this
oh yeah.
character's a kid. How come he's, dealing with all of this horrible dark Punisher-esque things like yeah, it's just it's something worth exploring.
like oh yeah. It is definitely worth exploring. But in the New 52, Captain Marvel was stripped out entirely, and the character was rebranded as Shazam. Recently, however, and this is where we jump back to what Kai said, Captain Marvel was brought to the silver screen under that title, Shazam. And Shazam, the film, has honestly fully cemented the character into its own without that Captain Marvel title. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is still a very, 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 very large chunk of Shazam fans, Captain Marvel Shazam fans, who absolutely refuse to call him Shazam. Personally, I don't really have an opinion one way or the other. In the episode, I have referred to him as Captain Marvel up until now because that is the character name in all of the legal documents. He did not fully become Shazam until 2011, and probably from here on out, especially when talking about the movie, I'm going to be referring to him as Shazam, which I can feel some people cringing off into the distance, as it were. But and like I said, the movie has cemented Shazam's identity, that and unfortunately to the ire of many fans, we're never going to go back to that Captain Marvel title. And what I thought was truly interesting about the film is that it had very touching but very confusing odes to Fawcett Comics, C.C. Beck, and Otto Binder. And if you look at it through the scope of the lawsuit, and especially DC's motivations, I guess we could put it politely, what that did. So I mean, there's some, because the high school in Shazam is Fawcett High. I mean, the movie's been out long enough. There is someone's father in the movie's name is Cece. So I mean, these are very specific homages that just become really funny when you look at it through the lens of the lawsuit, and how they crushed Fawcett. C.C. Beck and Otto Binder were laid off as a result of this. But hey, they get nods in the movie, so we cool now, I guess. Like,
yikes!
I mean,
oh,
as a fan, it was very exciting to see. But going back and looking at it this way, it's just kind of like, is it an ode, or are they just kind of rubbing salt into the wound?
I feel like it was meant to be like a thank you kind of thing, but it just comes off as petty. Like, it really does just come off as like, haha, middle finger.
Yeah. I mean, and of course that's very much like, it was a very touching homage. And I think I was actually talking to a friend after we went to see the movie, and she made a comment about how she felt that, in a sense, this may have been them apologizing for it. That Yes, we crushed you, we took this character away, but we're cementing the legacy. And I think that's a starry-eyed way of looking at it, but it's a point of view that I appreciate. And, these are, dark marks in DC's history that, as a fan, make it really hard sometimes. I mean, we could do a whole series of episodes about, oh, hey, here's another publisher DC drove out of business in the 40s.
See, I was about to ask you
But
that. Are there more instances, aside from this, the DC versus
Quality
Fox?
Comics.
Just, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
Quality didn't necessarily result in a lawsuit, but DC fully bought them out. Plastic Man comes from Quality. Black Hawk comes from Quality.
I love
So I
Plastic
mean,
Man.
there are other publishers that DC, putting it bluntly, kind of drove out of business.
Huh.
And this is the funny thing, for our resident filthy casual.
That's me.
You have heard of the storyline Crisis on Infinite Earth.
Yes.
The whole purpose of this storyline was to destroy the multiverse and take all of the characters and put them in one universe. So what DC did is they took all of these characters, they took Plastic Man, who was from a different company. They took, for example, Shazam, who was from a different company, and mushed them all together. So that way, if you go back and you look at some of these Golden Age books, oh, that's all just out of continuity now. Now everybody gets to live on this big earth together. And, now we can essentially present as we're the only publisher because all these characters are together now.
Oh.
I mean, it was genius. It was absolutely genius. I mean, first of all, it's a fantastic storyline, just, as a fan. But if you look at it from something like, I don't know, a marketing perspective, or maybe wanting your image to look a little better.
I didn't even think of
Let's
that.
take all these people and shove them on one planet.
Well, isn't that kind of what Marvel's doing right now with the Spider-Verse thing? Like bringing Miles and Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, sorry, into the 616?
Yeah,
They're kind
that's
of like,
essentially what they're doing.
I mean, because I was saying that's a pretty good move,
I mean,
marketing-wise, and just like
oh, yeah.
continuity-wise. So,
I mean,
yeah, that makes sense.
DC has since reestablished their multiverse because that, like, it gives them a bigger sandbox to play in, as it were. And DC at its core is all about its multiverse because of, in large part, things like this, where, you pull in from different companies with different histories. So, I mean, you have those aspects, but at the same time, you can play in the realm of Elseworlds and alternate universes. So it's even more interesting if you look at it through the scope of this lawsuit, how that has helped shape the narrative, 70 years later?
Huh.
So, I mean, it's a lot of insane little dots that you can connect. And, you want to look at it from a perspective of previous episodes. If Wortham hadn't written the stupid book, would this have happened? Would Fawcett have wanted to fight it? Would they have appealed it to the Supreme Court? And, this just furthers, a point that I've made in the past, that any action in comics can have potentially devastating outcomes. It's like dropping a pebble into a pool of water. Those ripples get bigger as they go out, and they affect a larger surface area. And so, this one lawsuit has kind of helped transform a narrative for 70 plus years now. And isn't it just mind-boggling when you put it all together?
Yeah, it's so much. There is so much. And who says comics are boring? There's so much to know.
Right.
Oh,
and that's why I like taking these little deep dives into these little areas, because, I mean, many people know the lawsuit, but the details of the lawsuit get a little murky. I mean, especially with the fact that, Judge Hand knocked it down to a lower court and Fawcett gave up. Like, I mean, I shouldn't say gave up, but you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, think about how much money they were pouring into
And
that already, and it was like they were already hemorrhaging money with the length of the lawsuit, so.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's funny because, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I've lumped it all into DC, but DC had been roughly 2 to 3 different companies at that time. Because there was National Comics Publications, there was Detective Comics, and there was Superman Incorporated, which at, different times were different entities that eventually kind of all got lumped into one company by the 70s. So that just shows you the capital that this company was swinging around, that they essentially just kind of waited them out. Like, okay, we're going to sit here and be 13,000 different companies while you deal with the financial ramifications of this 12-year legal battle. It is just funny. And National versus Fawcett is actually still an often referenced case in areas of copyright law and plagiarism because of the readily accessible subject matter and the popularity of its author, Judge Hand, among legal scholars. I didn't dig too deep into Judge Hand, but from what I did see, he was actually quite the judicial philosopher. So, right? But I mean, not only do you have... Maybe we might have to dig a little more deeply into him because he played such a huge role.
Yeah. Find out a little more about his philosophies and stuff. That could be...
And, his name. I'm sorry.
It's just such a good name. It is such a good name.
It's a good name. I was tickled pink.
It is such a good name. Judge Hand, though, sounds like if Judge Dredd is going to give you a bitch slap in there, it's like, Judge Hand. So I'm glad you appreciate it.
But from what I was seeing, apparently he actually went by Learned. So it is just wonderful.
Look, what else would you do? What else would you do if your name is Learned? You would that's like naming your kid Aristotle and not expecting him to be an intelligent,
a douche,
kind of like douchebag,
Well, I believe his first name was Billings. But even then, that's really not much better. Billings, Montana, and all that.
I don't know what that...
Montana's a state.
I know what Montana is. It's a restaurant.
Billings is the name of his... Yeah, no, Billings is the name of the state capital.
Oh, okay. It's a beautiful, strange... I love that name. It's ridiculous. I love it.
Right. But with the release of the film, that kind of concludes the story a little bit. And it rounds out our episode of, the legal battle, the changing of hands, and where it has ended up. But, I mean, I don't know. It just breaks my heart thinking about the creators that were laid off. And that's something I kept going back to in my research, and I just kept thinking about it because, a similar instance just happened with 2 publishers not too long ago. I'm not going to name names or get into it, but, even just seeing where the industry was at, where the industry is at now, like, these people will probably be able to find work in the field, but imagine, in the early 1950s, you've worked in comic books for years and then suddenly it's gone. So, like, it's the human element that I kept kind of going back to in my head. But at least there was some justice in the film, where CC Beck and Otto Binder did get nods in the movie. So at least there's that.
Yay!
Ooh, there we go. That's another episode we could do.
Ooh, what was your idea?
We could... The legal battle between Siegel Schuster and DC over Superman.
That's going to be a long episode.
Oh god, I think that's why I've kind of like strayed from that topic a little bit, because if you thought this lawsuit was complicated, Siegel and Schuster suing over Superman and members of the families that are still suing over Superman,
Just
still to this day, there
yeah.
are still lawsuits from the families. I mean, Siegel and Schuster, they're long gone.
Oh yes.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember which one, but one of them has like a niece or a nephew that keeps making noises every few years about it.
Well, that sounds like something we
And
should do, like maybe in the fall, if we're still
mm-hmm,
going in like September ish.
yeah,
Or October,
I mean,
where it's like cooler in my apartment and I'm not like
yeah,
dying.
and it'll probably take me that long to research the damn episode.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, there's, even knowing what I know off the top of my head, so many twists and turns.
Wow. Yeah, no, let's do that one. Do you
Yeah,
know what we're doing next week?
Not currently.
Okay.
I have a couple different things in mind, but I always say that. I always have a couple things in mind, but I don't know if I want to do more legal battles, because we've done 3 in a row.
Yeah, let's do something different.
Well, yeah, let's try to do something different. Maybe talk about something about how a real world thing has affected a character or a certain book, and let's stay out of the legal battles for a while.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, but we'll come up with something fun.
Yeah, and you can find out about that on Twitter, right, Mary?
Yes, you can find out about that on our Twitter. I'm sure I'll scream the next topic in all caps like I always do.
Yeah.
But any news or updates you might be interested in with us, you should totally follow us on Twitter at @OnComicsGround.
Yep. Definitely do that. We just operate under the one big flag, like the one big website. We don't have our own Twitter because we felt that was too convoluted for what we're doing right now.
Yeah. I mean, with this, it's easier. And plus, it links you to the rest of the fun stuff that we do.
Exactly.
Haha, multiple birds, one Twitter.
Right. And so what do you have coming up next? You're on another podcast this week?
Yes, I am on Panel to Panel tomorrow night, and I'm sure we will have plenty to talk about given what's been going on.
This week has been fantastic. I mean, fantastic. There's a lot of news for you guys to cover this week.
Absolutely there is, especially with Warner Brothers making it 100% official that Robert Pattinson, or Battinson, as people are affectionately referring to him, will be the next Batman.
That's exciting.
So we have a lot of really interesting. Oh yeah.
So that'll be tomorrow night, Saturday night, if you're watching live or watching this on a rerun on Twitch. It'll be hosted here on the Twitch channel on Comics Ground at 8 p.m. Eastern.
You should come listen to me talk some more.
I will. I'll be there. You guys should all come hang out too.
Yeah. We can have more misadventures and microphones.
I'm not on that podcast, so it'll be fine.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone listening who went on this wild and wacky legal ride with us, because, God, like I said, a mess is the only way you can describe this. But, if you're interested in just hearing me screaming about comic books and the internet personally, you can follow me on Twitter at @Sapphic Geek. I'm active pretty much every day, and hey, it's fun. Okay.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Raggedy Author. I'm not on there as much lately, but you can always hit me up over at On Comics Ground on Twitter as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you're around on Mondays, you should come check out my Star Wars podcast.
Yes, you should. Monday nights.
Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern, here on Twitch. Super fun.
And I think that about wraps it up for us, don't you think?
I think so. Thank you for indulging me in this history lesson, Mary. I always appreciate all of the work you do to get this podcast running and to teach my
I'm glad you had fun.
to teach my filthy casual backside a few history lessons. I appreciate it. I hope you guys all had fun listening. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next Friday. Yeah? And I can't hear Mary, so we're going to end it here. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye.